Arrested at a protest. Well, they might go to jail, get slapped with some fines, but there could be other ramifications if they're a college student.
If that individual is convicted, I hope he's expelled.
And on that note, let's take a look at all of the Multnomah County DA's protest cases that have finished trial or come to a plea agreement. Spoiler alert, there's not a lot yet. And the DA's office says there's a reason. And another plan to tackle homelessness in Portland. Why the city says you'll notice changes by this fall.
Portlanders are ready to see something different than what we're experiencing today.
Here's the story.
Big topics tonight. I feel like it's been that way all week. It's really interesting. Welcome to the story, everybody, on this Friday. Heavy topics for a Friday. You gotta love that. I'm Maggie Vespa. Dan is off this week in case you haven't heard, but fear not. Everything else about what we do here does remain the same. All the ways to contact us are at the bottom of your screen. You can email the story at kgw.com. You can reach out on social media with that hashtag HeyDan. That never changes. Let us know what you're thinking, what you want to see more of, less of, your feedback, your questions, all of that seriously drives this show. So with that, let's get started. And we'll start with our big story. Let's get right to it. Over the last year, hundreds of people have been arrested for protest and riot-related violence, and a lot of them are facing felony charges, including at least 3 local college students. So we wondered, what action do universities take when their own students are arrested? Here's what Kyle Laboshi found out.
College students have long been at the forefront of protest and social justice movements, from the anti-war demonstrations in the 1960s to the racial justice protests last summer. Students and activism often go hand in hand. But what happens when those movements leave campus and some of those students are accused of committing crimes? A KGW investigation found local universities vary widely in their handling of arrested students, some taking swift action while others wait for criminal trials to play out. In March, Matthew Klein and his brother Jonathan Peter Klein were arrested by federal agents after allegedly breaching the U.S. Capitol during the insurrection on January 6th. Matthew was a senior at George Fox University at the time, a private Christian college in Newburgh. In an email sent to KGW, a spokesperson for the school said that Klein had been dismissed from the university and is barred from campus, adding that student discipline is dealt with on a case-by-case basis. The university did not comment further due to legal and privacy concerns. Both Klein brothers now face multiple federal charges ranging from conspiracy to destruction of government property. While it's unclear what sort of internal investigation Klein faced, private universities are not required to provide the same due process as public universities. Most universities have unique student codes of conduct, community guidelines that students agree to, rules that, if violated, could result in suspension or expulsion, and in some cases, those standards can apply to off-campus behavior. According to the University of Oregon's Student Code of Conduct, the university may apply the Student Conduct Code to students whose off-campus behavior has a significant adverse impact on the university community, its members, and/or the pursuit of its mission and educational objectives. But deciding when to pursue an investigation is up to the university. Just last month, 19-year-old Alma Raven Guido, a student at the University of Oregon, was arrested for allegedly setting fire to the Portland Police Union building. She now faces a federal arson charge and up to 20 years in prison if convicted. A spokesperson for the U of O confirmed Raven Guido is still enrolled, but said the university could not share information on a student's conduct status. Experts say schools can take action prior to a criminal conviction, but only in some circumstances.
When dealing with potential felony behavior, a school probably can suspend a student while charges are pending if they believe there's a credible threat to the safety of the campus environment.
Joe Cohn is the Legislative and Policy Director for FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, a nonprofit that advocates for students' rights on college campuses. But despite the legal gray area, some schools said they wait until criminal trials have concluded before conducting an internal investigation. Theodore Matthew O'Brien is a student at Reed College in southeast Portland. According to police documents, since last July, Matthew O'Brien has been arrested on 4 separate occasions. The 22-year-old now faces numerous criminal charges stemming from protest-related violence, including an April 16th incident where police say Matthew O'Brien smashed the windows of the Oregon Historical Society. In a press conference last month, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler alluded to Matthew O'Brien's case and called on the student to be expelled if he is found guilty.
I noted, for example, that one of the individuals arrested is a student at one of the nation's most expensive elite private universities that happens to be located in our community. If that individual is convicted, I hope he's expelled.
We reached out to Reed College to see if any disciplinary action had been taken by the university. A spokesperson for the school said it cannot comment on the conduct of individual students, but that the college's adjudication process would only begin after a court case is resolved. Cohn says it's not uncommon for universities to wait until a criminal trial has concluded, partly because statements made during campus investigations can be used against students in court.
So even though the dean can't sentence a student to time behind bars, if they're speaking freely about potential criminal behavior to the campus, they've waived their Fifth Amendment rights in their criminal trial later on, because the transcript of that campus proceeding can just be read to the jury in the criminal case.
It's not clear how many college students have been arrested during protests and riots over the past year, but these 3 reflect the varied responses from universities in determining whether students can return to campus or not. Kyle Aboshi, KGW News.
All right, Kyle, thank you. So as he just said, it's hard to know exactly how many students have been arrested at these protests, but what is clear is how many arrests there have been overall and how many of those have actually resulted in charges and sentences. So all that said, let's run some numbers now. To date, 1,100 arrests stemming from crimes committed at protests have been referred to the Multnomah County District Attorney. 890 of those were rejected. The DA's office says there are 4 reasons for that. They are as follows: lack of follow-up, insufficient evidence, legal impediment, and interest of justice. At this time, the DA's office is moving forward with prosecuting 187 cases. 29 others are pending, and that means the DA's office is looking into those arrests but hasn't decided whether or not to pursue charges. And then that final figure at the bottom, a grand total of 6 cases have been resolved. Another way of saying that, after more than a year of, at times, nightly protests where we've seen fires and vandalism, 6 people have been convicted or pleaded guilty to the charges against them. So why so few? Well, the DA's office told us, no secret here, they have a big backlog of cases due to the pandemic, frankly, shutting down parts of the court system. That's a problem all over the country. And now we do want to reiterate, by the way, these stats are specific to cases being prosecuted through the Multnomah County District Attorney. There is also a slew of federal cases coming down the pipeline, and we're waiting on the U.S. Attorney to get us info on that. In the meantime, let's look at 2 protest cases that have actually produced punishments. First up, Marquise Love, convicted of assault and riot for beating a driver who witnesses said sped toward protesters, then crashed his truck into a light pole. There was video of that beating. It's on social media. It left the man unconscious, and as you can guess, it's graphic. We have a link to it online if you really want to watch it. Love apologized in court, and he was sentenced to 20 months in prison, followed by 36 months of probation. Number 2, Hannah Lilly, convicted of criminal mischief and arson for helping another guy set fire to the Multnomah County Justice Center, which damaged part of that building. Her sentence is 18 months probation and $46,000 in restitution to the county. Lilly, according to the DA's office, is paying that $46,000 in installments of $100 per month. By our calculations, that will take her just over 38 years. And the one final stat that I want to leave you with is that of not protesters, but police. Right now, the city's independent police review agency and PPB's internal affairs are investigating a total of 125 cases of misconduct by Portland police officers at protests. 89 of those are complaints about use of force. Okay, let's change things up now and talk solutions. Get a little happier on this Friday. Solutions specifically, though, for our growing housing crisis. We have been focusing a lot lately, you might have noticed, on the city's promise to clear more homeless camps. 13 camps were cleared this week. That's up from an average of 5 a week since the pandemic started. And in light of that coverage, Matthew had a great question. He wrote, if people living on the streets are, quote, swept, it's a term some use, do they have any options as to a safe place or places to relocate their shelter? AKA, does the city have property that might be designated as a safe zone for the homeless to set up camp while they wait for a better situation? So Matthew, I read that question, you might remember, at the end of a show earlier this week. I thought it was really good. And I said then, and we stand by this, the short answer to that question is no. The city has kind of organized tiny house or tent villages, but people have to be placed in those by nonprofits. There are limited spots. There are really no places in Portland where someone can kind of just show up, spur of the moment, and camp legally. But the reason that I bring that question back is that last night we got a joint announcement, a joint press release from the city and the county about 2 new coordinating plans to get more than 1,000 people off the streets over the next year and then keep that momentum going, we're told, for years to come. One plan from the city, one from the county, kind of coming in conjunction with each other. So we'll start with the cities, which produce way more of the villages that I mentioned all over the city of Portland. So in short, the city wants to use $20 million in federal COVID relief aid to buy or lease land all over Portland in every neighborhood and build multiple organized outdoor camps. They're calling these safe rest villages. So all that said, it is important to note there's a lot that we don't know right now. The city hasn't chosen these locations. We don't know how big these villages will be. We don't know if they're tents or tiny homes. But Housing Commissioner Dan Ryan says officials will be making announcements on a lot of these things soon. And quite frankly, they want to move fast.
We'll be bringing an ordinance forward in a couple weeks to the City Council, and we will have more dialogue about that. It's really important for us to take some steps in the right direction. We need some action. I think Portlanders are ready to see something different than what we're experiencing today. And so if we could have 6 of these villages up and running by the end of September, that's a step in the right direction.
6 villages by the end of September, meaning we will learn a lot over the summer, and we will obviously keep you posted. Okay, on to the county's plan now, and this is tied to one of those housing bond measures that a lot of you ask about. In May of last year, May of 2020, metro area voters approved the Here Together Supportive Services measure. That money starts coming in on July 1st. And County Chair Deborah Kafoury says they'll start using it right away to get people off the streets and into what's called supportive housing. And that means housing units, in this case, that are already built, they're already available, and they come with wraparound services to help people battling addiction and mental health issues, things like that. The biggest headline here, the chair says this measure will allow the county to devote $1 billion to this mission over the next 10 years. And here's how big a dent she says this could make.
The money that we are going to raise from this measure will go in this next year alone to house as many as 1,300 households. So 1,300 people and their partners potentially will be off the streets, out of shelters, and into permanent housing.
We are talking about housing the unsheltered. Like when you say off the streets, because we talk a lot, you and I have talked before about what's needed to keep people in their housing or people, in all different kinds of circumstances. But that's a specific demographic.
Correct. This measure, 75% of the dollars are focused on people who are chronically homeless. And that means that they've been homeless for more than 2 years. And so those are the majority of the folks that you see when you're walking around town, people who are living in tents or, and also people who are living in our shelters.
So we have a ton more on these 2 plans right now at kgw.com. You can read all about it. And we're working on a story for next week about more of the money from those housing bond measures, because we get questions from you at home all the time, basically saying, hey, I remember voting for those measures. Where has that money gone? Well, stay tuned. But in the meantime, I want to remind you all about our Hey Help campaign. This week, we are highlighting, you might have seen, Cascadia Behavioral Health Care, and we're asking you to consider donating to help support the services they provide for people living on our streets. Just open your camera on your phone like you're going to take a picture and then point it at this QR code. It'll take you to a donation link. And by the way, we're calling this a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount, no matter how small. It all adds up. And by the way, so far, you've donated more than $2,700 to Cascadia. So a huge thank you to everyone at home who has donated. That is so huge. And each week, by the way, we're going to highlight a different cause. So we have all of our causes online. Cascadia comes to a close today as far as being on TV with us. But we need a new one. So if you know of a nonprofit or an organization in need, let us know. And use that hashtag, HeyDan.
Months before George Floyd was killed, a black man in Washington died in police custody after uttering the words, "I can't breathe." Now, the officers involved have been charged with murder and manslaughter.
Some of the organizers here have even gone as far as to say that Manuel Ellis is our George Floyd.
And if you're wondering about the outlook of this year's fire season, well, it doesn't look too great.
The fire season's getting longer, the forests are getting drier.
When the story continues.
A lot of comments for a Friday, a lot of thoughts on the protest story and some of the pieces that we've had here tonight. So keep them coming. We love that. We always go through your tweets and your emails during the show. Use that hashtag on HeyDan on social media or email the story at kgw.com. Now, though, I want to talk to you about a case in Washington that you might have seen making headlines this week. 3 police officers in Tacoma have been charged with the death of Manuel Ellis, a black man who died in handcuffs while those officers were restraining him. And a warning, because some of the video that we're going to show is hard to watch. The officers, Christopher Burbank, Matthew Collins, and Timothy Rankine, appeared in court this morning. 2 are charged with murder and 1 is charged with manslaughter. Ellis died in their custody way back in March of 2020 as he was walking home. At the time, police said Ellis banged on the windows of a patrol car and assaulted an officer. But witnesses told investigators that Ellis had actually a casual conversation with the officers and then started to walk away when the officers knocked him to the ground. There's that video. It shows officers repeatedly hitting Ellis and holding him face down on the ground. Investigators say one of the officers put him in a neck restraint. Ellis can be heard saying the words, "I can't breathe," on police dispatch audio. A medical examiner ruled his death a homicide caused by loss of oxygen due to physical restraint. And a lot of people, including Ellis's family, have drawn parallels between his death and that of George Floyd's. And again, keep in mind, this happened almost 3 months before Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. So earlier today, I spoke with Lionel Donovan, a reporter at our sister station in Seattle, King 5, and he talked to me from a news car parked right outside the Pierce County Courthouse in Tacoma, where he covered today's arraignment.
Can you talk about how, frankly, rare that is in cases where there is deadly force for officers to be charged?
Well, yes, it's actually historic. This is actually the first time that the Attorney General has charged an officer for use of deadly force. And I believe this is only the second time that an officer has been charged with use of deadly force since Washington adopted I-940, which really got the ball rolling when it comes to police accountability and everything. So this is actually a very historic case, and this is something that has kind of been heralded by a lot of organizations and advocates for police reform, saying that these charges do. In fact, I think the NAACP put out a statement today saying that these charges represent the dawn of police accountability. And so many people both within Washington and around the country are looking at this case to see exactly how effective these reforms will be when it comes to holding law enforcement accountable.
There are a lot of similarities, a number of similarities, I should say, with the George Floyd murder. That being said, it's obvious that this case did not get the national attention that George Floyd's did. Your thoughts, though, on how big of a conversation this has been locally?
It's been a very big conversation. Some of the organizers here have even gone as far as to say that Manuel Ellis is our George Floyd, because the cases were so similar. We have 2 videos that show what happened that run counter to the official accounts. We have both men saying the same phrase. However, as I was saying earlier, some of the organizers have gone as far as to accuse the Tacoma Police Department of trying to cover up some of the details of the case. And they say that could have been one of the reasons why, or some of them have alluded that to being one of the reasons why this case did not get as much national attention as something so much as George Floyd. They have been somewhat energized by the outcome of the Derek Chauvin trial, now that they saw that a guilty verdict was possible. Many organizers actually use that as an incentive to try to get other people involved in Manuel Ellis's case. So many of them said, okay, now that we have seen what has happened in Minnesota, we want those same results here in Washington. So some activists have tried to use the George Floyd case as a springboard to get more attention to Manuel Ellis.
Our thanks to Lionel, by the way. All 3 officers are on paid leave, and they pleaded not guilty today. They'll be back in court next month, and we'll keep following this case. All right. In the meantime, let's change gears. We got this question on Twitter from Hermione. #HeyDan, can you talk about the potential for another horrific forest fire season here in Oregon? Predictions are that we're going to have one of the driest, or the driest, summer on record. California is wisely attempting to prepare for disaster with preventative fires. What about Oregon? Several question marks. So to answer that, let's go to our quote of the day from the Klamath County Commissioner, Derek DeGroot. And as you can see, he says, "Nothing looks good." About sums it up. That's what he told OPB about this year's fire season, which, by the way, has already officially started in parts of southern Oregon. Those areas are dealing with extreme and exceptional drought conditions right now, according to this map from the U.S. Drought Monitor. But as you can see, almost the entire state is in some sort of drought at this point. And that means a lot of dry fuel that can burn really quickly. So Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley is asking for $1 billion from the federal project to go toward mitigation efforts like prescribed burns.
The fire season's getting longer, the forests are getting drier. So we have to do a lot more to prepare on the front end, try to reduce the ferocity of those places. That means a lot more forest management, prescribed burns, and so forth. And it creates a lot of good jobs.
So Merkley also says that more than 2 million acres are approved for thinning, but there's just no money to pay for this yet. So we're planning to do a lot more on this. We'll stay on this and also just on fire season in general. So if you have any questions or anything that you want us to look into, let us know and use that hashtag HeyDan. All right, let's count some vaccines now. Cue the giant numbers. More than 2.28 million Oregonians have gotten at least their first dose of the COVID vaccine, and that works out to about 65%, just over 65% of the state's adult population, which is the metric that Oregon is using to determine when to reopen. Over to Washington, more than 4.23 million people have gotten at least their first dose, which works out to about 68% of the state's adult population. Both states are waiting until they hit 70% to fully reopen. All right, keep sending us your questions and your comments with the hashtag HeyDan. I'm going to read some of them when we wrap up the story on this Friday, and that's coming up next. Good question from Kara on Twitter. Hey, Dan, any count or more info on the people who got the first dose and then said they wouldn't be getting the second dose? I think the count that the state has issued before, and a lot of states are tracking this, are people who have gone for the first dose and then didn't show up for that second shot appointment. I don't know that they have anybody self-reporting that they're not planning to go get that second shot, but I know that that number is available. We'll get it for you and see if we can answer that question on Twitter. But a lot of good questions and a lot of comments on our protest pieces as well, especially Kyle's piece. So weigh in. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you want to see more of. You guys always have the best ideas. We're very lucky. Thank you guys for watching the story on this Friday. The news at 6:30 is next with Laurel Porter. Have a great weekend.